Hi everyone, so welcome to our third unit, which is the blue folder in Blackboard. We're going to be working on some more complex ideas and some more interesting topics, I think, so I hope that you enjoy that. The title of this unit is Theory, Power, and Ideology. So the one word that you don't see there is politics, and so a lot of what we'll be talking about will border on the political, but then this unit kind of assumes that everything really is political. So one of the things that I want to point out to you is that this course is communicating about ideas and values. And several years ago, when I first taught this course, I was talking to a group of people who were not academics. They don't work at a college. And someone said to me, "Oh, I'm so glad you're teaching that course. Kids today don't have values anymore." And that comment kind of bothered me, and I had to think about why that bothered me. And one of the conclusions I came to was that that person was assuming that my job here in this course was to tell you what values to have, or that I should somehow make sure that you have your own values. But when you get to more advanced courses, in your education, you realize that it doesn't matter what those values are. My interest isn't what values you espouse, but my interest is in how you communicate them and how you can break them apart to understand them better, as well as how you can interpret how someone else is communicating about their values and dissect those as well. So those are some of the intellectual tools and skills that I hope that you'll be developing in this particular unit. So it's called Theory, Power, and Ideology. So I'd like to start backwards, actually, and start with ideology. Ideology is the set of values and ideas that are the overarching guide for how you live your life. So when you have to make decisions, without even realizing it, you probably consult your own set of ideologies to know how you feel about certain things. They act as kind of a moral guide in terms of how you live your life. And we also talk about, or we will be talking about, political ideologies, such as, there's a Republican ideology, for instance. So if you're someone who's a Republican and someone is a Republican politician, then you might realize that they share your particular ideology, your particular way of looking at the world. And same thing with Democrats, same thing with libertarians, same thing with communists, that they're united because they share an ideology. But ideology doesn't have to be political. Ideology can also, influence how you live your life on a day-to-day basis. So let me give you an example. I was at a convenience store and using the ATM, and when I walked up to the ATM, there was $120 sitting there in the ATM and a receipt that no one had claimed. So my first thought was, oh, whoever's missing this must be frantic. And then I thought to myself, well, if I had lost that amount of money, I would hope that someone would turn it in. So I felt like the thing to do was to turn it in. So I took it to the clerk, and he must have been used to that kind of thing, because he knew to show it to the camera and then to staple the receipt to the actual bills, and then he took it to the manager's office. So I think he was showing me that he was doing the right thing with it too. And so that assumed a certain ideology on my part. The ideology I was operating under in that particular circumstance was, oh, I would want someone else to do this for me, therefore I should do this for someone else. And that's a pretty powerful ideology. Some people call that the golden rule. But you'll see it's a rule that exists, and it informs how we make decisions on a daily basis, what we should do in certain circumstances. So it's a rule. Ideology is usually a set of, as I said, values and ideas from which we derive rules that we then apply to specific situations as we go about living our lives. So that's ideology, the set of ideas and values that determine how we live our lives. And they can be larger ones too. There's an American ideology. For instance, at the birth of the United States, the ideology that dominated in government, previous governments, was the divine right of kings, that God had chosen that particular individual to be the king, and therefore who was any human to dispute that? So that's a pretty powerful ideology that the early Americans, the founding fathers as we call them, took issue with throughout, started a new country that rejected that particular ideology and established a new ideology based on freedom. So ideology really comes down to the abstract concepts that guide the smaller things in our lives. Now, going to the middle concept in the title of this unit, power. How is ideology tied to power? So that's more obvious in some ways than in others. So if we look at, say, the ideology of the divine right of kings versus the ideology that the early Americans developed, which was equality, that you're born with certain rights, and one of which is you're equal to everyone else, that certainly determines who has power in a given society. So obviously, that's a little easier to interpret, that if you're born in a monarchy, such as France in the 17th century, or England then, or earlier, going back to the medieval period, that determined who led the government, right? Which individual was in charge of society at the time. And so that, in that sense, the power's more obvious, right? But also, I was in Target one day, and I saw a series of books on the shelf, and they were called things like Why a Son Needs a Dad, Why a Son Needs a Mom, Why a Daughter Needs a Dad, Why a Daughter Needs a Mom, etc., etc. And we think of those things as, oh, that's nice, or oh, that's sentimental, or what nice children's books. But they are kind of teaching an ideology. So if you read those books and you buy into that there are particular notions of roles people play in a family, that's also a way of determining who's in power within a given situation. So ideology, these set of rules that guide our lives, oftentimes result in certain people having power or certain people not having power. And those are some of the issues that we're going to look at. So that brings me to the first concept in the title of our unit, theory. What is theory? So this is something that's formally called critical theory. You might also hear it referred to as political theory. Theory with a capital T is how we used to call it in graduate school. And what theory does is asks really annoying, incisive, dissective questions to rip apart ideologies, especially in ways that we hadn't really thought about before. So I remember growing up on the school bus, there was a kid who used to drive other people crazy he would always say, "That's what you think. That's what you think." So every time somebody said something, he would say, "That's what you think." And it didn't occur to me at the time, but maybe that's kind of a brilliant approach to dissecting ideas, right? So that's kind of what theory does, is asks annoying questions and saying, why? Why do we think this? Why is this the truth? And with theory, you can start taking apart ideas that you had thought were real and realize that they're not as real as you had thought. Theory asks questions. Theory says, why do you get out of bed in the morning? Why do you vote? Why do you participate in this particular formulation of democracy? Why do you arrange your family in a particular way? Why do you raise your kids in a particular way? Is someone else benefiting from the decisions that you make? And the thing about theory is it's confusing for a lot of people because it doesn't provide answers. The job of theory is not to provide answers. The job of theory is to take apart, to dissect. So if you think of the theorist as like the biologist who's dissecting a frog. What are you left with at the end? They don't put the frog back together, bring it back to life, and then all is well. No, once they've done their work, all you have is a pile of guts, and you throw it away. So that's kind of what theory does to ideas. It's what it does to institutions. Theory is always critical. That's why it's called critical theory. So it looks at things like schools. Are schools doing what they are supposed to, or are schools privileging certain people? Is the family set up in a way that privileges certain people and not others, and what can we do about that? Is healthcare set up in a certain way that privileges some and not others? And are belief systems set up in ways that privilege some and not others? So we're going to be looking at different theories that provide us with lenses, a series of tools through which we can take apart ideas. You don't have to agree with many of the theorists that we're going to read. I just ask that you let the ideas sit in your head long enough that you get a feel for them, and then you can engage with them. Then you can communicate about them, which is the whole point of our course. So the first question we're going to be looking at is, what is the nature of humanity? Are humans naturally good, or are they naturally bad? Or, as I learned is often the right answer in such questions, is the answer both or neither? So I think we'll have a good time looking at that, because if you assume that human beings are good, then you're going to have one particular ideology. You're going to make decisions based on a way. If you think that human beings are naturally bad, you're going to make very different decisions. And so those are the ideas that we're going to look at when we read Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. So I hope you have a good time with this unit. I noticed there are 3 kinds of students when we get to the unit about theory. The ones who love it, who come alive, who are changed forever. The ones who hate it, they get it, but they hate it, they don't like doing it. And then there's the ones who are just confused. So I do want to assure you, if you find yourself confused, you're probably getting a good understanding of what theory is all about. So take a look at the assignments for this week, and let me know if you have questions.